You are now tuned in to Go Time Dolphins with Charlie Touche and Kadeem Simmons, the Miami Dolphins podcast that's for the fans and by the fans.
Gotta make them lose their mind when it's your time. And it's show time. Going all out when it's go time. I ain't wasting no time. Gotta make them lose their mind when it's show time. Cause it's your time. Lay it on the line when it's go time. Don't waste no time.
Hello. Welcome all. If you are listening to the audio, you won't notice anything just yet. But if you're watching on YouTube, be it live or after the fact, you will notice that that is not Charlie Touche to my right, to my left. Yeah. It is 5 Yard Lee of the Dol-Fan UK podcast. Lee, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I can't believe people wouldn't mistake me for Charlie, though.
It's the hair.
Yeah,
Definitely the hair. Before we get started, that looks a lot better. 5 Yard Lee has his own little box, own little UK flag. Charlie hasn't been replaced. Charlie is currently busy, and we thought it was best to get an episode out as soon as possible. Obviously, you know, we're a bit not at our full schedule at the moment, but that should be changing very, very soon. Shout out to Tim Caro, says, "What's up, guys? Sadly, off to bed. Keep smashing it. Look forward to listening in the morning." Thank you very much, Tim. Yes, it's his 11:15 here in the UK. But before we delve into all of that, see if I can know the intro once again after I did it last time so perfectly. Backstretch. It's Go Time Dolphins, the Miami Dolphins podcast that goes not only across the pond, but across the world. I'm your co-host, Kadeem Simmons. I have a special guest, 5 Yard Lee, with me. It's always for the fans and by the fans, your favorite podcast. I think I know it once again. But yeah, Lee, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Good to be on. Man, it's funny, isn't it? It's a weird time of year, but I'm still excited to talk football.
For me, this is like one of the most favorite times of the year because there's so much potential, and you are a month or two away from completely like nailing the off season, which the Dolphins have been known for years. Like they win the off season and then essentially win nothing else. But again, I kind of feel like it feels different this time, and we'll get into why. But this is one of the most important drafts for the Dolphins of the last few years. People will look at the 2020 draft and say, well, you had 3 first-round picks, and you had to get your franchise quarterback and all that kind of stuff. But it really does feel like if the Dolphins don't get this draft right, we could be looking at another rebuild. What do you reckon, Lee?
Yeah, had they got the draft wrong with 3 first-round picks, it would have been bad. But you still would have been at the ground level. Do you know what I mean? There still would have been that chance to, okay, we got it wrong, and a year later continue to just rebuild from the bottom up. But yeah, you've got to the stage now where you've invested enough in star talent. You've got enough big contracts coming down the pipe that you now need to be able to supplement that with cheaper talent.
Yeah, it's interesting. Shout out to Hannah Montana. She says, "Hola," and shout out to Cap for Life. He says, "Gentlemen, welcome Cap and Hannah." There's been a few, again, before we delve into the draft, there's been a few Twitter stories. I think the first one we'll probably start with is Christian Wilkins, in that it seems like the Dolphins are generally going to let him hit free agency, that the two sides can't reach a middle ground where he essentially signs that new contract. And it seems like the Dolphins aren't going to franchise tag him. I think some people are kind of saying, well, why don't you franchise tag him and try and get a deal done? But it's essentially, if the Dolphins tag him and they can't find a trade partner, then they're stuck with wherever the cap is, and you can't restructure that cap. Like the Dolphins are trying to get under the cap and then bring in talent. And one of the ways they can't do that is by essentially tagging Christian Wilkins. But hopefully they can get something done. But quickly, your thoughts on the Christian Wilkins situation at the moment?
Yeah, I thought the Christian Wilkins thing is really interesting because it was only a couple of days ago that everyone's opinion had kind of gone the other way for the news reports that came out that said the Dolphins were going to do everything they can to stop Christian Wilkins from leaving. That their intention was to make sure that either way he was on the team. So it's amazing, isn't it, how from one story to the next we can flip so badly. I wanted to actually ask you something based on the tweet from Jeremy Fowler. And this is going to involve your journalism skills, so that's why I'm asking you, because maybe I'm looking too much into this. But it says several league sources expect Dolphins Christian Wilkins to avoid the franchise tag. Miami sources say keep in options open, but teams bracing for star DT to hit free agency. That sounds more like other teams are bracing for it based on what they've heard, not that the Dolphins are bracing for it. It sounds like all options are still on the table for the Dolphins, as if nothing has actually changed from the week before, where all options are still on the table. I don't think based on this one tweet that I believe that all of a sudden this is any more a done deal than when they said that he definitely wasn't leaving.
Yeah, it's again, it's interesting because the report doesn't, or the tweet doesn't say that he's gone or that talks have stopped. I think you probably got teams around the league going, well, you're kind of running it really close to get a deal done before we can legitimately speak to him. And because of that, they're like, okay, well, we need to kind of factor in Christian Wilkins into our off-season plans. Like, it might be a case of you're looking at other defensive tackles because you don't expect Christian Wilkins to get there. But now it's like, this is a legit possibility. So we need to then pivot from our plan B to essentially our plan A. But again, the Dolphins are probably like, we're still comfortable because we can still legally speak to him and no one else can legally speak to him. It happens every single year where it's like, the tampering period of free agency, once it opens, everyone's already got a deal. It's like, well, how's it happened? Because you shouldn't have been able to talk to this person. But I think the Dolphins are probably still calm. I think the Dolphins are probably also looking at going, we saw this coming last year when we tried to get a deal done and we were far apart. And Wilkins continued to improve. So if the rumors were they offered him 18 and he went to 24 and he's only got better, what do you do? So it's it shouldn't be surprising that the Dolphins and Christian Wilkins haven't got a deal done right yet, but that doesn't mean nothing's going to happen because there's still how many days until it does. And yeah, the Dolphins will probably still feel like they're in the driving seat, even if the car moving at 5 miles per hour towards the finish line. Another one very quickly is corners. So any long-term listeners of Dolphins would know that I have constantly paraphrased 5-yard Lee, which essentially I say Chris Greer, since getting the reins of this Dolphins team and really starting to push out, the Super Bowl caliber team that this Dolphins team essentially is, he wants 2 veteran corners. Even if you draft Noah Igbinoghene, even if you draft Cam Smith, even if you bring in Kadeem when he plays significant snaps, the belief or the strategy is we have 2 veteran corners. So the 2 veteran corners that have been, I say, linked to the Dolphins at the moment is the Darius Sneed and Marshawn Lattimore. Hasn't been linked to the Dolphins, but seeing that the Saints are in such bad cap casualty, he could become available. And again, at that point, it's the Dolphins might look. What do you make of that, given you are the one who kind of says that Chris Greer wants 2 veteran corners?
This is gonna get me going. I think we know that coaches have traits. We saw it with Brian Flores. He only wanted older guys. He only wanted veterans that he could trust, guys that had produced in the league. There was this definite age bracket where he was like, you're below this. He's not that interested. We know that with Coach McDaniel, like he wants fast guys, but will block as well, that they are willing participants in the blocking game. Like there are like obvious traits that these guys would follow. Well, you brought up some names there that Chris Greer has brought onto this roster, like a Nick Needham and a Kader Kohu, over the last few years that have played incredibly good football. At the same time, when he had Xavier Howard, he went and got Byron Jones. When he had Byron Jones, he chased J.C. Jackson in free agency. When he didn't get J.C. Jackson, he went and chased Jalen Ramsey and got Jalen Ramsey. I think until he proves otherwise, I believe that a fundamental part of Chris Greer's belief in the way you should be building a roster revolves around having stud corners. So people keep saying that the Dolphins can't be in the market for a top graded corner because they don't have the cap space. They didn't in some of those other circumstances, and they still chase them. When they went after JC Jackson, they already had X and Byron Jones on the roster, earning top money. I think at the time they were the top 2 earners at the position. So look, we all know that the cap is. You can manipulate it to an extent. You're going to pay for it down the line, all the money has to be paid. So, but there is ways to get it done. I just believe that Chris Greer sees that as a premium position that he's not willing to skimp out on. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes after big name talent. The other thing to watch, and I'm going to say this because Charlie's not here to stop me. I think they would have retained Xavier Howard on a lower number. I think it was purely the number. I thought his play through the first 11 games of the season was really quite good until he got hurt. And then he struggled. Okay. But that's what made that cap number intolerable. And we know Xavier Howard is not willing to move on the number unless it's going up, which is fine. That's absolutely his prerogative. I've got no issue with that. It's a business for the players the same way it is for the team, and it's not my money. So fine. So I can understand, why the team moved on and why he's not willing to give up money on that contract that he signed. But I don't think that stops Chris Greer from going after a stud corner, and it could be someone else via trade as well.
It's interesting because part of the problem which Jalen Ramsey had in his first season as a Miami Dolphin was that Vic Fangio saw him as a cornerback, and he specifically stated on social media, "I am a DB." So I think people saying, well, you'll have Ramsey and, Snead on the outside, or Ramsey and Lattimore, or Ramsey or whoever, what does it mean for X, Y, and Z? No, if you're able to bring in a Ladarius Snead or a Marshawn Lattimore, both who are 27, both who are in the prime of their careers and still have room for improvement, it allows you to say, okay, do you know what? We're going to have Kodu in the slot. We're going to have Cam Smith and for this, Ladarius Snead on the outside. And we can put Jalen Ramsey wherever we want. So all of a sudden now it's like, oh, this is interesting. As opposed to just having Jalen Ramsey and Cam Smith and then kind of going, well, we're limited by what we can do because we kind of saw last year that Kadeko, who is a slot corner, not that he struggles outside, but it's not his best position. And if the Dolphins want to be flexible and not be so rigid in their scheme and move Jalen Ramsey wherever, we speak about having Jalen Ramsey cover number 1 receivers. So if we're playing Buffalo twice a year and the Buffalo want to move Stephon Diggs inside to the slot and Ramsey's like, no, I'm going there. I'm covering him. You don't want to have to move Kadeko outside. It might be like, okay, for this specific down, we're going to have Cam Smith on the outside and Snead on the boundaries. So I kind of think that people are looking at it from a point of view of not that it's narrow-minded, but like the Dolphins, you can play more than 3 corners at once. And for those to also say, well, they don't have the draft picks, I will say this now. If Snead comes available for a second, what would you rather have in a second round pick? A corner played at the top of his game or a complete rookie who you don't know what you're going to get? So I just don't see why the lack of draft picks should stop the Dolphins from bringing in proven talent, especially if this is the Super Bowl window. Like the Dolphins have over the past few years haven't played that many rookies. So it doesn't surprise me that they're looking at, hey, let's go bring in a Snead, a Lattimore, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. But
the rookie thing is really interesting. Sorry, I wanted to just move on to the thing that you just mentioned there about rookies and them not necessarily playing a lot of rookies. It's really interesting because Vic Fangio takes a lot of the stick for not playing Cam Smith, rightly so. Also, clearly the defensive players are unhappy. I mentioned this to you a few weeks before the end of the season that Jalen Ramsey just wasn't he did not look like a happy player. And I thought it was going to come down to the organization is going to have to make a decision here, whether it's the player or the coach. And I think they made the right decision. But Mike McDaniel doesn't like to throw rookies out there either. You didn't see Devon Achane going out there straight away. He's going to bring these guys into the offense as they develop. I think that is also a kind of a team philosophy as well. It's not as simple as, hey, look, this guy's great. We can throw him straight in. There will be exceptions to those rules. Obviously, if you draft a plug and play player on the O line, there is a possibility that happens. But I think if you're looking at the skill positions, they're going to do the same thing. So I don't know if having a different defensive coordinator would have got you Cam Smith in the early weeks of the season as a direct replacement for Jalen Ramsey during the injury.
It's interesting you mentioned O-line. Like, we spoke briefly before we went live on the phone earlier. So the Dolphins currently have a first round pick, a second round pick, and then nothing until the 5th round. So they don't have a third and fourth round pick. Dolphins Twitter, Dolphins fan base are kind of like, your first round pick 21, has to be offensive lineman. It just has to. It's either JBJ or is it Fatanu? There's a few names. I don't want to get into the names right now, but it's like you have to go essentially either central or guard at 21. And we find this very interesting and very funny that Dolphins fans say that Chris Greer can't draft offensive linemen. You know, ignoring the fact that of the current 5 offensive linemen, 2 of them are draft picks in friend of the podcast Robert Hunt and friend of the podcast Robert Jackson, and everyone wants those guys retained. So it's like, well, Chris Greer can't draft offensive linemen despite the fact that 2/5 of the offensive line are draft picks, but also Chris Greer had to draft offensive linemen. So I was like, if you don't trust him to draft offensive linemen, don't tell him to draft offensive linemen. And if you do, like, the two things don't match. So Dolphins sitting there at 21. What would your tactic be? Is it best player available? Is it draft a need, or do you trade back to try and get a third, fourth, whatever, more picks in the draft to try and, essentially have more chances of winning?
This could sound like a terrible answer, but it's simply best player available, because tell me a position that we can't go best player available outside of quarterback.
It's quarterback, kicker, or punter. That really is it.
That's what I mean. I mean, you could make an argument for pass rusher, but those guys are all banged up. So can you have too many pass rushers? Like, if you drafted one and one came good and someone returned from injury, you could trade them off the roster by the trade deadline and recoup picks in the future. There's options there, but I mean, realistically, I mean, you could take a wide receiver, a tight end, most positions on the O-line. I mean, you could even take back up to Teron Armstead if he says he's coming back. You could definitely take D tackle. Even if you sign Christian Wilkins, you could take another D tackle to offset Christian's money. At the moment, we've got one on the roster. You could definitely take a linebacker. Could you have a safety? Deshaun Elliott's out of contract, isn't he? So,
yeah,
I'd love to bring Deshaun Elliott back.
Brandon Jones out of contract as well.
That's what I mean. I think Nick Needham is as well. So, we've just discussed corner, so you could go anywhere in the secondary. Like, just saying, I think, especially when you talk about the first round where you're taking all those specialists off the table, I think you have to go best player available because it's the best thing for the franchise. I don't think we're that good at any position. I just don't think we're that good at, I don't think we're that complete at any position, that deep.
Yeah. Obviously, this is a conversation before free agency. So the Dolphins pick up a defensive tackle, a pass rusher, a wide receiver, a linebacker, and a safety in free agency, as well as like 2 or 3 offensive linemen. And essentially, you have the perfect free agency where you go into drafts going, we are sorted. We don't even need to draft or anything like that. It's interesting because Xavier Worthy has the fastest 40-yard dash in combine history, 4.21. And Dolphins Twitter was like, take him at 21. Had to go at 21. And you get people saying that, and then others going, well, you got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Why do you go wide receiver at 21? It makes no sense. Lee, why should the Dolphins go at 21 if the right guy is there for them?
I think if the right guy is there to complement what they've already got, then I think you have to, because I know I've mentioned this to you off the podcast, but I don't think any of the wide receivers are necessarily safe below Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Like, there's some good guys there. Are there any guys that you're going on the hill to die for to be on this roster that couldn't be upgraded? I don't know if that's true either. I love some of the guys on there. I think they're really fun to watch. I think they're good for the offense, but I don't know if they are what I would class irreplaceable players. So yeah, but I think for me, like I said, I think it has to be a complement to those first two guys, and that's not necessarily just a speed guy. I think speed is going to be something. It's going to be a factor for anyone McDaniel drafts at an offensive skill position, right? That's almost. It doesn't mean you need to be the fastest necessarily. I do think that he's going to look like. I think there is a good chance he looks for a bigger bodied guy as well, because something we have lacked in certain situations is a big body to go to in the red zone. We know that Darren Smythe struggles to get a little bit of separation. We know that Tyreek is short. Jalen Waddle is not the tallest. Braxton Berrios, not the tallest. River Craycraft, not the tallest. You know, your best shot at that was Eazy-E, but suffered the injury. Obviously, being a neck injury kind of puts you in limbo. Like, I hope he's doing well. I hope he's ready to go next year, because it looked like they had some exciting stuff made for him. And that's another reason to go with a bigger bodied guy if he's there at 21, if you feel that the value is there, because you've got a package that you believe that you can run with a guy of that size.
Yeah, we mentioned John Ross. John Ross comes into the combine, runs a blistering speed, and gets drafted way too high, and doesn't have the NFL career that many people kind of expected. And again, it's Xavier Worthy's combine, especially that 40, shouldn't, in my opinion, move him up the board, because, like you said, it's you see the 40 and you go, well, does that speed translate to the tape? Is he really that quick in pads and against other guys? If you were high on him, so essentially, if you're high on him and you have to see the 40, go back and look at the tape. If you're low at him and the 40 has raised his profile, go back and look at the tape. Like, I know people who were very high on him years ago, but some people are still saying this speed doesn't change the fact that there's still multiple guys, ahead of him. And listen, the Dolphins again have a lot of wide receivers who are leaving the franchise over the next week or so because they're under contract. We saw what happens when the Dolphins wide receivers get banged up in terms of Waddle and Hill. Being able to go to someone else and be like, hey, come get some targets, come get some receptions. It makes a massive difference. Also, we don't know how long Tyreek Hill is in Miami for. He's not getting younger. He might be like, you know what? I've had 3 great years in Miami. I want to go elsewhere. I'm just gonna, go do something else. The Dolphins need to plan beyond this year. While it's a Super Bowl window, and while you want the Dolphins to maximize what they have right now, the Dolphins have to plan for the future at every single position. So, for me, I will say this with essentially every single pick. I don't think there's a single player in this draft who I would stay and pick at. Even if JBJ is the center from Oregon, if they're at 21, I'm saying great, brilliant. I'm trading back. Essentially, I'm trading back to try and get a 3rd or 4th round pick in the 1st round. In the 2nd round, I'm trading back to try and get another 3rd or 4th or 5th round pick. It's only till I get to that, essentially 5+, I'm not trading back, because I'm not really getting much value. But I just think that, and shout out to the guys at Clock Blockers, Stephen and Jason Sarney. They made a valid point, which is more draft pick doesn't necessarily mean you nail the draft. Because if you start with 7 and end up with 10, but only 1 hit, that means you have a success rate of 1 out of 10. That's an awful draft. If you have 5 draft hits that the Dolphins have and you nail 1 out of 5, great, brilliant. So it's all relative, but I know for a fact if Center is there at 21, and especially after JBJ said, I grew up a Dolphins fan, people are like, well, this is it. This has to happen. If the Dolphins move back and he goes on to have a Jason Kelsey-like career, people will go, well, the Dolphins made a massive, massive mistake. but the Dolphins have 5 draft pick and multiple holes, even through free agency. The Dolphins are going to have. We saw how bad this team was by the end season due to depth issues. The Dolphins need to get younger, cheaper across the board. Linebacker, safety, like again, there's not a single position, including quarterback, where the Dolphins don't need to get younger and cheaper.
All right. So you're definitely the proponent of trading back.
Yeah, listen, the only reason I wouldn't trade back is if the Dolphins brought back every single person on the roster last year, and then you go at 21, we truly can go best player available because we're sorted. Outside of that, it's like, no, I'm trading back. I'm trying to get more picks.
It's funny, isn't it? For all the people out there that are convinced that Chris Greer is terrible at drafting players, right? The only reason we're worried about getting younger and cheaper right now is because we've got so many players coming up for contract. And that'd be based on him drafting them, right? So let's say that he's doing an okay job because we're in this predicament.
I've seen people say, well, if Van Ginkel and Christian Wilkins go, I can't defend the general manager no more. And it's like, why? Like, what do you expect to happen? Both of those guys deserve to go and get paid top money at their position. The Dolphins can't afford to pay them top money because you've got Tyreek Hill, Bradley Chubb, Jalen Ramsey. Even if you get those guys to restructure their contracts, the Dolphins still have multiple holes. Like, again, it's Chris, for every Channing Tindall, Noah Igbinoghene, which don't quite pan out, there's again, friend of the podcast, Robert Hunt, there's a Austin Jackson, there's a Javon Holland. Like, remember when the Dolphins took Javon Holland in the second round, everyone was like, what are you doing? Who was the safety, Grant, I think his name was. It was like, I think he ended up going to the Falcons or something, but it was Falcons or Raiders, but he was seen as like the number one safety in the class. The Dolphins took Javon Holland, everyone was like, he's messed up. The fact that I can't remember the other guy's name and Holland is probably going to get a massive contract in Miami and deserves it shows that was the right pick to make at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the draft time is, you have to be really careful, and I think as fans we all have opinions, which is our prerogative. We all latch onto players we like, which is fine, and we're all happy to bang the table and then lose our minds when the team doesn't follow through with exactly what we think. But there's not many of us coming out and shouting about when we're wrong about players. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can happily tell you, like, I was a huge fan of Reuben Foster. Like, and I watched him drop through that draft, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Like, we're actually going to get a chance to pick him. And then the pick came and went, and he carried on falling. I was like, that's weird. But of course, I didn't have the full picture.
Yeah.
So I was doing it off some underwear workouts and some game tape where he played for one of the best college teams, one of the best teams in college football. So, that was my own personal bias. But I was wrong. It's okay. Like, he was a favorite of mine, and I was wrong.
Yeah. Shout out to Chris Oconee. Obviously massive fan of Reuben Foster. Tried or was campaigning very hard to get him into Miami. And Chris is also the guy who hooked us up with Geronimo Allison. Check out our last episode with Geronimo Allison, former Green Bay Packer. While you're there, obviously subscribe to the channel, give us a like, not just on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all the good socials. If you're feeling generous, you can subscribe over at Patreon. And I think we also now have Super Chat on YouTube. So again, only if you're feeling generous, it's 2024, all that stuff. But I just think we spoke about essentially staying put and drafting or trading back. Do you think there's any could you justify moving up for not just anyone in the draft, but say a position in the draft? Like, again, say we'll go with Oregon center, or if there's a guy you like, should the Dolphins move up for him?
Okay, so here's somewhere where I have a definite opinion, right? If there is a guy you love, go and get him no matter what. Because as a GM, as a coach, you cannot be sitting there when you get fired saying, I didn't have the team that I planned to have. You've got the ability to go get them. Make sure they're on your roster. There's no real excuse. Like, we've seen all the stuff with Tyreek Hill saying, I was almost a Jet. When it came down to it, the Dolphins wanted him more, and they made sure it happened because he had just as much intention of being a Jet as a Dolphin, right? He would have been happy with either move. So the franchise failed their fan base, and I think, look, this is the same thing. I would have traded up for Tua in that draft because he was clearly their guy from the start. Like, it doesn't matter if you're wrong, because most of the organizations are going to be wrong, let's say, 60% of their draft picks anyway. So, but at least take the picks you want, because there's no point in sitting here afterwards saying, and I think we've seen it in the past where you've reached and you're like, why have we taken that player? And essentially what's happened is you've got stuck there and you've ended up trying to take the best player on your board, and it's not really panned out for you. I think we've seen it in the past as well. I can't even remember who the player on the board was. There was a left tackle on the board at number 3 when we moved up to draft Dion Jordan, which was obviously bad. It didn't pan out, but that was the guy they wanted. So when they came away with him, they cannot say that they failed based on not getting their guy. Like,
yes.
The people who lost their jobs, like Mike Tannenbaum was part of that draft, if I remember rightly. Like, there's a reason these guys are not part of the organization anymore, because that's what they did. But they've got no one to blame but themselves. They got the player they wanted.
It's interesting because that draft in particular, so you got Eric Fisher goes number 1 to the Chiefs, Luke Joku goes number 2 to the Jags, Dolphins move up for Dion Jordan, and then the next pick is the Eagles take Lane Johnson. But that first round is just full of players who didn't quite pan out. Obviously, there's some absolute stars in that draft. So again, obviously we mentioned Lane Johnson. You've got where is he? 27th overall, DeAndre Hopkins by the Texans. That guys like Tyler Eifert, Desmond Trufant, and Xavier Rhodes had solid NFL careers, as did I guess Zach Ertz, Darius Slay. But again, it's hindsight, because you look at this draft, and I'm kind of like at the second round now. Obviously, like Le'Veon Bell goes second round, Kiko Alonso goes second round, Jonathan Hankins, Jamie Collins, but a lot of these guys just didn't last. That Travis Kelce, third round. Travis Kelce. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, like, this is the exact point, isn't it? Right? It is not all about first round talent. Being in the first round guarantees you nothing. Like, we've got players on our roster that were drafted late. Tyreek Hill was drafted in the 5th round. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't guarantee you anything. So, and we saw it. We had 3 picks in the first round. Didn't all pan out, did they? Like, it's not that simple. So, there's so much more to it. Every draft, there's 7 rounds, 32 teams, plus supplemental picks. Most of them don't pan out. It's a small minority that actually go on to be top line NFL players.
Yeah.
That's why you see players like Tyreek Hill having long careers, Teron Armstead having a long career. That's because it's not that easy to replace them.
I'm glad you mentioned Armstead, because I'm looking at this third round for the 2013 draft. Start of the third round, Kelce to the Chiefs. Pick 69, Tyrann Mathieu to the Cardinals. Pick 75, Teron Armstead to the Saints. Pick 76, Keenan Allen to the Chargers. Pick where we're looking at. That's essentially it. But again, those are all third round guys. Brandon Williams to the Ravens. You're there just going guys who had successful. This might be one of the worst Dolphins drafts, by the way. It's Jelani Jenkins in the 4th round. Third round, they took 2 picks after Teron Armstead, Dallas Thomas. And that's the thing. It's maybe you need to go and get your guy. If he's sitting there, there's nothing wrong with the Dolphins saying, you know what? We think there's 3 guys in this draft who we must have on this roster, and we're going to move up each time to make sure that guy is on our roster. Because again, the flip side is, say the Dolphins draft a wide receiver in the 5th round, and it doesn't turn out to be Tyreek Hill. It's like, well, why wait to the 5th round? Because that's just where the draft board fell. So I don't know. I feel like the Dolphins are going to upset the majority of the fan base with their picks. There's nothing the Dolphins can do about it. That's just the way life is.
Also, I think there's a really interesting exercise you can do here. Like, if you've got a group of friends, or maybe you could host it, just saying, could throw you under the bus here. Me and you have been part of it in the past. It's a fan draft where you essentially mock out the entire draft process. It becomes increasingly difficult, even in the first round, because it only takes one team to take the unexpected player and it throws everything. You know, it can be a really fun process, but all of a sudden, even at that level, it's kind of eye-opening because it only takes one team being stupid, and there is plenty of stupid teams in the NFL. Like, we've seen some crazy decisions made by all franchises. Like, let's be honest, like, it happens. So I think that's an interesting exercise you can do to kind of go through that experience and see what happens when you're suddenly stuck with a pick and all your players have gone off the board. I think we did it. One year we had like 7 players on the board, and then all of a sudden they just drop off one after another. And we're like, at the time, you're like, I don't really want to give up anything to go get them. And then you end up going, I've got a pick because no one wants my pick and my guys are gone.
There's a mock draft on Pro Football Network. Someone sent it to me in a group chat. And now I'm looking at it, I'm thinking that might be a Wayne Jones who we are hoping to get on the podcast very, very soon. He said, okay, it's not his mock, but this has Caleb Williams going first, Jaden Daniels going second, and then the Giants moving up to pick number 3 to get JJ McCarthy. If that happens on draft night, everyone's like, hold on, wait, what? That's the kind of trade which completely throws out the entire draft pick. So the draft board, because all of a sudden it's like, we didn't expect the Giants to be so aggressive to go get a quarterback. And then you're seeing like the Broncos move. I think the Broncos might have moved up to get Drake May. But this has the Dolphins taking Graham Barton, 21st overall, the guard from Duke. Very high. Again, the one thing that's come out of the combine is that the wide receivers and the offensive lines are so deep this year that you could probably still find starters in like rounds 2 and 3.
I mean, that brings up one of my draft pet hates, right? So one of the things that I hate, and we've seen it in Miami so many times, and I respect all the draft analysts. Like, they obviously put in all the work. They watch all the tape and watch all the drills. Is when you see the combine and when you see people writing up draft articles and they go, this guy's played guard, but he projects well as a tackle. It's like, how often does that actually pattern out? And the answer is not many. What actually happens is you turn out to be one of those guys that is okay at everything, but not really good at anything. Do you know what I mean? I think Taylor Lewan was on the combine today. I was watching O Lyman this afternoon, and he said, I can play one position. He said, if you go back and watch his tape, he sucked at doing everything as a right tackle in the combine. He said he can play one position, and he was lucky that he was drafted by a team that only had intentions of playing him as a left tackle. And I think that's, I think we could probably have seen that a little bit with Liam Eichenberg. I don't believe Mike McDaniel takes a Liam Eichenberg, because one of the first things he said is, I play in my position. I don't want to move to the other side. And then they started cross-training him. Not
to mention they moved up to go and get him.
Yeah. And I've got no problem. This is not a dig at Liam Eichenberg, because he's being a great teammate and a team player, because we have asked you to do something clearly that's not, what he thinks he's best at, and he's doing it for the team. And I would argue that based on giving him that kind of short shift, that actually he's performed quite admirably, because you're not, how many times has he actually started at his natural position?
What is his natural position, to be fair?
Wasn't he left guard?
Yeah, so I was a fan of him, and I was one of the people that was like, he's really, really good, but he projects to play, or you could move him to right tackle. I was one of those guys, and obviously didn't quite happen. But yeah, he's played all over the place. Left tackle, right tackle, center, guard. and it hasn't really benefited him. It's made him versatile, but it's also made him look what is his third or fourth year in the NFL and kind of going, where do I fit into this team? And it's not fitting into a starter. So you wouldn't be a fan of drafting Teron Armstead's replacement. He's the future left tackle of the Miami Dolphins, and play him left guard to learn from Teron Armstead. And then when if Armstead goes down, you move him back to left tackle, but you keep him at guard. You wouldn't be a fan of that.
I wouldn't necessarily not be a fan. I think there has been times that it's worked. I think you are adding an extra layer of risk to a player because you risk doing as much harm as good, because for all the times it's worked out, it has also failed badly. Larry Tunsil played inside for a time, didn't he?
Yeah.
And performed incredibly well both positions. Larry Tunsil was also one of the best left tackles in the league for how many years? So, true elite talent. And let's be honest, we drafted him 13th, but only because he fell. This is a guy that was actually considered to be worthy of the first overall pick, right? So he's an exception and not the rule. But you see so many players who are like, oh, this guy projects well. He played tackle, but he projects well as a guard. So what you're saying is, at college, no one ever noticed that he'd probably be better playing one position further in. Bearing in mind, so many college players are not going to the NFL anyway. So somehow this guy was getting beaten out by someone who is most likely not as good as him. And you're now saying that a position change when he steps up against better talent is actually going to help him. I don't know. I just personally think it works out so rarely that it worries me when I see people say it. Like, if you want to draft a left tackle, draft a left tackle. Like, someone who's been training to do this his entire life. I think Liam Eichelberg's a good example. I was just looking it up. He was a tackle in college. Like, I think he'd be. Yeah, if he played tackle, I think he'd be better now than he has been. Doesn't mean he'd be great. Just
he was the left tackle in college, and they moved him to right tackle. But that's the thing with the Dolphins. The last 3 Dolphins offensive linemen they've taken in essentially the first 2 rounds. Austin Jackson came in at left tackle, played guard, and has settled at right tackle. Friend the podcast, Austin Jackson. Friend the podcast, Robert Hunt, spent his first year playing guard and tackle, both on the right hand side. And to this day, there will be people who say play my right tackle. The dude is going to get paid at right guard, one of the better right guards in the league, and you're still telling him to play right tackle. Why would you do that for? And then Liam Eichelberg played left tackle in college. He moved him to right tackle once he got to NFL. They moved him to left guard. Then he spent last year at center. Like, it's crazy.
The interesting thing about all 3 of those players is, do you think it has benefited any of those 3 players' careers? Like, Austin Jackson was considered a bust until a new O-line coaching staff came in this year and basically resurrected him to get him the extension. Like, Rob Hunt is great, but for how many years has everyone's first thought been, we need to go O-line? Like, has moving positions actually helped him in the long run? Yes, he's going to get paid as a top guard. Great. I'm really, really pleased for him. He'd probably be even better if he'd just been if he'd been just a right guard. It's just my personal thought. I'm sure everyone else feels differently. Clearly, draft analysts do, because they're forever saying it. But I just think it means you probably don't know where he projects best, which is, I say, probably more of a concern for me. Like,
the Dolphins. Okay, I say the Dolphins clearly need to draft offensive line. You hit free agency correct, and you don't. Like, again, the guys like Lester Cotton, Rob Jones, is it Keon Smith? Guys who, when they stepped in last year, were more than adequate. You give them a full off season as starters. Who knows what they become? And again, listen, the Dolphins are about to pay their franchise quarterback. You need to protect him to make sure he stays right and keep him upright for more than 2 or 3 seconds. So you would like to think that they do kind of invest heavily in this offensive line. But it's one of those things where, because of the guys on the offensive line, you kind of have to expect that they're going to get hurt. Like, again, no offense to Ron Armstead. he's going to get hurt this year. No offense to Austin Jackson, he's probably going to get hurt this year. And if you keep Robert Hunt, no offense, he's probably going to get hurt.
Because history says that's what's going to happen. It's not a personal slight, and it's not guessing. It's really just saying, hey, look, this is what has happened every year in the past, so we have to plan for it to happen in the future. Because until someone proves otherwise, that is the basis you have to operate on. So, I mean, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's crazy. You stay for bonus time?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of I don't know why I asked you that, because Charlie asked this, like, yes, of course I'm taking bonus. I'm not going nowhere. But again, before we head into bonus time, Lee, where can they find you?
You can find me on the Dol-Fan UK podcast and a 5 Yard Lee on Twitter. Come talk football.
Yeah. Make sure you go check out the Dol-Fan UK podcast. They recently had Alec Ingold on the pod. Lee and Simon also had Simon Clancy very recently as well. Two great guys. I would like to think everyone subscribed over here is subscribed to them as well. But I am really bad at the outro, so I will give it a go. It is for Kadeem Simmons. No, for 5 Yard Lee, I'm Kadeem Simmons. Thank you for joining. No, you know what? I can't do it. Charlie, can't wait
It was
to
a good
get
effort.
back. Yeah, I am not an outro guy, but we shall see you on the other side of the outro. Peace.
Gotta make them lose their mind when it's your time. And it's showtime. Going all out when it's go time. I ain't wasting no time. Gotta make them lose their mind when it's showtime. Cause it's your time. Lay it on the line when it's go time. Don't waste no time. Gotta make them lose their mind when it's your time. And it's showtime. Going all out when it's go time. I ain't wasting no time.
So, Sport Track essentially believed that Tua was going to sign a $220 million contract with like 150 million guarantees. Is that around the ballpark number?
Yeah. I mean,
let's have a look.
Look, quarterback contracts only go up realistically, because otherwise you're admitting that really he's not the guy and you don't believe he's the guy. I do think there is some exceptions. I think there is some you can do some contract stuff. You can do some shorter contracts as well to bring some of those numbers down. You know, like Kirk Cousins did a short contract, fully guaranteed. Like Patrick Mahomes' contract is obviously mega, but it's up and down in regards of the per year money. So I think there's some stuff to go on there.
Yeah, 4 year, 220 mil, 165 million guaranteed this off season. Everyone knows myself and Charlie are Tua fans. The Dolphins, when they signed that contract extension to Tua, should they draft a quarterback in this year's draft?
Yes. There's some clickbait for you. Yeah, I absolutely think they should draft one, because I think it can help clear some money off the roster without having Mike White as the backup. It gives you the chance to go with Skylar if he develops enough, or potentially bring in somebody else. So I'm not against it. To compete for QB1, that would seem like the only reason you do that is if you truly believe Tua is not the guy. And if that is the case, I believe you basically go into full rebuild mode.
Yeah. It's crazy, because to me, it's good. Is it not Mike Davis, not Ron Wolf? There's someone who basically said you draft a quarterback every single year. Even if you have your guy, you draft a quarterback, because if you come across an absolute stud, then you can move them for future capital. Like, again, the Bill Belichick successful period with the New England Patriots, they had Tom Brady. He was the undisputed QB1 in that team, and they drafted so many guys and got multiple like early picks for them. Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Brissett, because hey, listen,
Matt Castle.
If the Dolphins build a successful team that wins multiple championships, people are going to want to take your coaches, and those coaches are going to want to take their players. So, say Anthony Weaver has a great year in Miami, the Dolphins win the AFC Championship. We'll leave it at that. And someone hires Anthony Weaver as their head coach. Like, I need a quarterback. And the Dolphins draft this guy and he's like an absolute stud. And Weaver goes, I want that guy. So, say the Dolphins draft to his brothers. Like, I saw him in practice every single day. He's a dude. He is a stud. I want Tua's brother in insert team name here. And they say, we'll give you a second for him because we believe in him that much. You say, and they took him in the 5th round. You just flipped a 5th round pick for a 2nd round pick, sorted. And Tua is the guy Tua's brother is the guy I'm drafting this year. If I'm taking one quarterback, people say take Michael Penix Jr. because he's left-handed. I'm drafting Tua's brother. That's what I'm doing.
So I completely understand drafting left-handed quarterback. That actually, makes an awful lot of sense because it's the least amount of change going from QB1 to the backup. I think we've seen in the past, teams go from somebody who wants to sit back and read the field and make passes to having a quarterback like Tyrod Taylor who's the backup. And it's like, this just makes no sense because the entire philosophy of the offense has to change. So to me, that is a bad way of building your QB room. I love the idea of drafting Tua's brother. I think it is a fabulous idea. I think he played well in college. Is he the best? No, that's why he's not first-round pick. It's not going to happen. So that means he's obtainable talent. He backed up Tua at Alabama, so he's done it before. I'm going to assume, judging by Tua and what we know about the Tagovailoa family, that they're fairly close-knit. So having them all in South Florida would be a benefit to him. I think it's probably would make QB1 pretty happy as well. Don't know if you could use it as a negotiating piece in the contract. I don't know how legit that idea is, but just saying. But there was talk about Talia trying to transfer to Miami if College would give him an extra year of eligibility. Look, that's not a coincidence. He backed Tua up at Alabama before moving. Like, these things are not a coincidence. Like, I'm not sure if you could go particularly wrong doing that.
I think for all the Miami fans who want the Dolphins to move on from Tua, and they exist to entitle their opinion, cool, fair enough. If the Dolphins extend Tua, give him a lot of money, and then draft his brother, the Twitter meltdown will be worth it in itself. It's like, not only do you have one Tagovailoa, you have two Tagovailoas. People are going to lose their mind. So, no, it will be... I just don't think, even with the limited draft capital that they have, drafting a quarterback on day 3, chances are allowed you to move on from Mike White. And again, the reason you probably gave Mike White that money was a really expensive backup option in case Tua went down. And again, it made sense. Tua showed you he could play a full season. And no offense to Tua or the rest of the team, if Tua goes down injured, the season's done. No, very few NFL teams are built and equipped to withstand your QB1 going down injured. It doesn't happen. So all this whole, it's got to be someone. Listen, teams don't carry 2 stud quarterbacks. It doesn't happen. And you could say what the Eagles were very, very fortunate, but they had
the outlier.
Yeah.
Maybe we just trade for Justin Herbert and then we just got ourselves covered always.
Oh, could you imagine? That
Sorry.
No. It'll be brilliant. It would be brilliant. But I just think the Dolphins, if we had a Miami Dolphins round table, we got yourself, we got Simon, we got guys from the Finns tailgate, we got guys from clock blockers, we got, same old Dolphins. We had like 10, 15 people here. So do you know what? We are going to have a mock draft and we are going to be the Miami Dolphins war room. And we are going to say, okay, we're going to do it. Get to pick 20, pause. Or not even get to like 15, 16. The people will be like, let's trade up. People will be like, let's move back. The fact that the chance I will have not just the obvious options, stay at 21, trade up or move back. I can almost guarantee there will be 5 or 6 names there to take at 21 or whatever you do. And the fact that us as fans and friends who know each other can't agree, do you really think that you're going to agree with people who you don't know and don't know how they think? Like, come on, let's be honest, it's just not going to happen. So Reuben Foster is the greatest example. There's countless others. There's TJ Watt. There's whoever. Dolphin fans, do not fall in love with anyone in this draft because the chances are they're not going to be a Miami Dolphin. Doesn't mean it's a bad pick. It just means that the Dolphins have seen more than you, they know more than you, and they want to go in a different direction. That's just how life works.
The best time to fall in love with a Dolphins player is when the final 53 is announced. Because until then, there's chances for anyone to be moved from the roster. And even then, there's still a chance, but it just gives you a better chance you guys still being there. I think at this time of year, we're so desperate for football. We try and make that assumption, and NFL teams can't get it right, and they pump millions of dollars into trying to make these decisions. And I'm pretty sure me coming home from my day job and watching 3 days of the combine, probably not the best guy to make that selection.
Yeah, it's crazy. But Lee, once again, thank you so much for joining me. I hate doing podcasts by myself. They are absolutely horrible. So hopefully Charlie will be back very, 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 very shortly. Spoke to him, speak to him quite a lot. We want to get something out for you guys. We should have more content out on Patreon. And yeah, if you haven't already, go back and check out the Geronimo Allison episode. Great chat. Chris Ciccone, thanks for setting it up. And also, while you are there, go and check out the Dol-Fan UK podcast. But we shall see you on the next one. Peace.